This talk was given during the Symposium on Poetry and Medicine held on the day of the Hippocrates 2015 awards. Wendy French has just completed a year as poet in residence at the Macmillan Cancer Centre, and Vikky Riley is a cancer nurse specialist.
Auden. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along.
That I've been for many years as a cancer nurse, and the majority of my career I've spent working with teenagers with cancer, where there's a lot of attention paid to what they need. But it seems to be if you're a certain age and suddenly all those things go out of the window, so creativity, all of those things that we know are important suddenly don't seem to matter once you hit a certain age, which I think is an interesting thing that we could talk about for ages. And the reason Wendy and I got to know each other is I work in the new Macmillan Cancer Centre at UCLH, which is interesting. It was a partnership between Macmillan Cancer Support charity and UCLH, which is an NHS hospital. So that in itself is quite interesting in our current times with our precarious NHS. So Macmillan invested £10 million with the hope of delivering cancer care in a different way. There were people like me that were saying, well, what's going to be different? And I guess one of the most important things to say that's happened to me in my lifetime as a nurse is that some of cancer care has changed. So people now have treatment through what we call an ambulatory route. So even 5-10 years ago, what we now expect people travelling to daily, they would have been in an inpatient, in a ward, being hopefully cared for, but care has now changed. So we are a centre where we see some of the very specialist cancer services. So we have people that travel vast distances to come and have their care. But that means that where their support is placed is different. It's not necessarily on the wall, having a chat. They have to travel backwards and forwards. It's expensive, being a cancer patient. And I guess also most of us have had our lives touched by cancer, either personally or through someone close that we know. I still think it's very fascinating as a nurse, but I often say that if I stood at the top of Tottenham Court Road and asked everybody I saw which illness they still most fear, the majority of people would still say cancer. So I'm not for 1 minute saying there's not other illnesses that are as bad or as difficult or as challenging as cancer, but it is the illness that still resonates. It's the illness that has a language all of its own. It touches people in different ways. If you tell someone they've got cancer, often it's associated with, does that mean I'm going to die? We look at things like childhood leukemia, which has been transformed over the last 30 years. It is potentially a very curable cancer now. But you tell a mother their child's got leukemia, they react, as if it's the end of the world. And yet if you were telling your child if they had epilepsy, to me that would be far more significant. Does that make sense? So though care has changed, success rates have changed, people are living longer, they're living, they're being cured of cancer in many cases. The media, society still has cancer where it was all those years ago. If you ask GPs, the feedback we get from our patients, you ask a lot of GPs, their impression of cancer is, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So you have a patient that's been told they've got a condition that's potentially curable, but the GP will still approach them as if they've got an incurable condition. What we see every day and what's different in our centre, when they decided they wanted to do this new shiny, lovely building, it's all glazed. Some people have seen it, some people won't. It's very open, isn't it, Wendy? So you go in and you're struck by its openness. The architects told me that part of that is that they wanted cancer to be visible and not hidden. So the sort of classic hospice on the hill, a million miles away from town, they wanted to turn that on its head. But what we noticed when the centre first opened, that was a lovely aspiration, but a lot of people weren't ready for that change. We have screens that have patients' names on. I think it's a bit like going to the airport and you have these poor people that have checked in online and they stand there looking for their name to come up, then they get directed to where they go. There are things that people thought were really good ideas, and we still have mixed feedback about some of those things. Some people feel so strongly about their name on a screen, they want an alias because they don't want it to be out in the public domain. So there's that challenge. And I guess the other thing that we see is, for me, what I think is something I try to be mindful every day. And one of the things that Wendy and I have talked about a lot is that my everyday is going to work in a cancer centre, but what I watch is how cancer becomes the people who've been diagnosed their everyday. It is gruelling, it is difficult, it's challenging. You have side effects that mean you can't hide from. So people walk down the road, if you've lost your hair, people know you're probably having cancer. It's very visible illness for many. On the other hand, some of the treatments now mean it's less visible. So people don't get the attention or the support that they need because they assume you're fine. We also know that the media has a huge part to play in the pressure with people. I mentioned language, which is something I'm fascinated by, as is patient stories, or the stories people need to tell us, and how quickly you get processed into a cancer diagnosis. You quickly become the woman with secondary breast cancer or the patient with renal carcinoma, rather than a human being who might be a mother or a wife, might be a teacher, and all those things somehow get lost and you get processed. And I see those people come in, they're often there 5 days a week. Often you see them at the beginning when they're feeling okay, and you see them further down the line when they're feeling absolutely dreadful. And also cancer is so much about waiting. It's one of the things that we see is how people come and they wait for their diagnosis, they wait to see the doctor, they wait to see the nurse, they wait for pharmacy. It goes on and on and on, and then afterwards when you've had your treatment you wait for your 3-month scan and then your 6-month scan, and this goes on. And how do you make sense of some of those things? And the other thing I think is a bit like learning a new language. So for me it's a bit like going to a country where you don't understand the language and you try and make your way. Doctors forget that people don't understand what neutropenia means or what sepsis means. And they talk in these terms, and you see patients desperately trying to get mastery over those words so that they feel there's a sense of equality when they go in with the doctors. And I can see some people nodding, so I'm glad it resonates with people. I think it's also an illness that, what I don't think is acknowledged, it's really associated with loss and the need to grieve. So the young teenager that has a treatment that means they're going to be infertile doesn't necessarily resonate when they're 16, but when they're in a serious relationship, or how do they start a serious relationship? When do you make sense of these things? Or patients that we see that have to deal with losing a limb or their breast, or even their penis. We've set up the first penile support group for men with cancer because we recognise that despite what people say, men will talk if you give them the right conditions. And this is so coming on to why we started the group. I was constantly struck when where I actually work in particular, I work in what's called a Macmillan Support and Information Centre. Macmillan Support and Information Centres vary across the country. Sometimes they can be a cupboard with one person, or they can be a slightly larger cupboard staffed by volunteers. We're in a very privileged position at UCLH that when the service was open, the heads of service wanted to do a model which was for qualified staff, believing that if you had qualified staff, you could offer a higher level of emotional support for people so that you could actually help them make some sense of their cancer journey, and also have a place where they set the agenda. So what is very interesting in the work I do on a daily basis is the sense of privilege that people will come in. So the assumption is that they've just been diagnosed with cancer and they want to come and talk about their cancer, but actually what they want to do is come in and talk about who they are. Suddenly trying to keep hold of who they are and make sense of some of those things. And one of the things that led for us to think about that in the context of language was some people talking about the power of words, the power of poetry, and those sort of just a different side of themselves. And I also think cancer is also all-consuming. So we get told it's the thing that you think about first thing in the morning, it's the thing you think about last thing you're going tonight. Your friends phone you up and all they want to know about is your cancer. They don't want to remember the fact that you might be a teacher or all those other things. The whole world becomes about cancer, which is why we decided to do our first creative word group. We struggled with what we were going to call it. We had a volunteer that was very keen, and we had several meetings, and then I met another gentleman that was very keen, and then somehow we met Wendy. I still don't quite know how it happened.
I applied for the wrong job.
Oh, that's right. And then I met Wendy thinking, I think I'd rather Wendy did this group. But anyway, we had our first meeting, and one of the gentlemen, who's lovely, but just he thought he was coming to tell people how to write. Does that make sense? When actually what we wanted was a different experience. So Wendy and I co-facilitated the group, I think initially for 2 years, wasn't it? And again, that's interesting. So I get pressure off one of my heads of service. I said, well, when are you going to end this group? It's not a good model to maintain people being dependent on a group. We did some feedback, we did an evaluation recently, and the thing that came out really strongly was the open nature of the group allowed people to dip in and out when they needed to. So there are some people that come every week, but actually if you look at some of those people that do come every week, they are people that are really living the long-term side effects of treatment. We've got one woman who can't eat, so she's fed by a peg tube. She can't breathe without her tracheostomy. Her tracheostomy is offensive, it's always smelly. She gurgles, so she goes into a coffee shop and will walk out. And the only place that she feels that she can come and sit and be a human being is the creative writing group. And it's interesting, so we forget that's what it's offering for her. And the other thing I feel passionate about is that cancer can let you lose your confidence. Even the most confident person in the world loses their confidence, can feel very isolated, and then you lose that essential social connectedness that we all value. And I think what we've strived to do with the group, probably not even thinking it was going to happen, is provide us some kind of social connectedness for people. So we've been running it for 2 years, and we've had the privilege of working with Raoul, who's also here today to help us do another programme. But the importance of the group to the people, that they keep coming. We've got one woman dying of horrible ovarian cancer, which she's had 5 lines of treatment, but she will still try and prioritise coming. And the feedback, what they tell us, it's a place where they don't have to think about their cancer unless they want to. Of course it emerges in what they write, and they can write some really profound things, they can write some absolutely terrible things, and because sometimes the work's really good and sometimes you sit there thinking, okay, but actually it's not really about the quality, it's about allowing them to use words in a way that feels comfortable to them. And I think for me, of all the things I've done in my career, it's probably the thing that's given me the most sense of privilege. Because to actually sit with someone when you're asked to write something, and it might even be, we did an exercise about what we put on our table, and that was truly amazing. So I'm going to hand over to Wendy.
I think after what Vikky said, it would be quite nice to start with one of the patient's poems, which is called On Your Bike, Nigel. This is the patient who cannot eat anything solid ever again. Like Joseph, I was thinking about your talk, about how you said it's the price that we have to pay sometimes for cure. Sometimes we can be worse afterwards. Vicky's going to read On Your Bike, Nigel, by one of the patients, and then I'm going to read my response to the group, to her poem, because I think with words like this we can have a dialogue with patients that that you can't have in every day. It's too difficult for them to sit down and tell you how they're feeling. But when I read this, I wrote a poem in response, and Annie, she doesn't mind me using her real name, loved it. So this is...
I'll try and give her some, I'll try and do it to her.
She called her cancer Nigel.
A short history of Nigel. The 29th of December, 1992. No one knows exactly when Nigel moved in, because he was very quiet at first and didn't make his presence known for quite some time. Even when he did, he was little trouble, and we turned a deaf ear to him. Now that deaf ear is going to be his downfall. One thing I do know for sure is that he'll be back on the streets before he knows what's hit him. Eviction proceedings are about to start very shortly, and then we'll see who's the boss of this house. If he thinks he can just walk in here and make himself at home, he has got another thing coming. On your bike, Nigel. 9th of May, 1993. Official naso-endoscopic confirmation that Nigel has indeed got on his bicycle. 9th of May, 1998. Huge party to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the start of Nigel's long bike ride. 15th of January, 1999. Well, Nigel did ride off into the sunset, but unfortunately he left his bastard son behind. He was born roughly around the end of October 1998 and got right up my nose, literally. However, he will fare no better than his dad did, though eviction proceedings will be a bit more complicated this time. So he too will definitely be out on his ear before long, and neither he or his offspring will be allowed to darken my doorstep ever again. Get back in your pram, son of Nigel, and piss off. September 1999. Son of Nigel did get back in his pram. Someone had left the brake off, and he went hurtling out of sight forever. I hope he didn't leave any bastard grandchildren behind. May 2012. Well, after 13 years, there's been no sign of any of Nigel's relatives, but unfortunately, the bailiffs were rather enthusiastic when they made sure of that. Now the house is falling apart, bit by bit. With any luck, some repairs might be possible, or even reconstruction. We need some renovations, that's for sure. Got a new chimney already, tracheostomy.
And I wrote this reply, which is cured, with a question mark, again thinking about what Joseph was talking about this morning. Red prime colour, the smell of newly picked tomatoes, purple-red blush of the bruise after chemo. Through her window she sees the dust carts disposing food and garden waste, remains of cake, Christmas comes, challenges to keep cheerful. Pills are counted out for the day, and on Woman's Hour, recipes for leftover turkey while the kettle boils. No choice, only hot chocolate to slip down a throat. Walking from Warren Street Tube to Huntley Street, certain signs can't be avoided. The fruit barrel, apples past their best, the appeal of an orange pip. Orange, Turner's turbulent skies, the December tangerine, iodine, rich on the skin. Her head moves in a robotic fashion. It turns like this in order to see to cross the road. Chin down on her neck, hearing aid in, ache for all that there is. See the sea, the street as it is. The smell of sourdough bread and the recipe for a special drink. Irish whiskey, one way or another. Even the halal restaurants jeer. Another code, $3.50 for a biryani. Yellow, buttercup speaks under a chin. Sunflower seeds once good to eat, bile in the bowl. Through the centre, the revolving doors where a blind man is led by his dog to the lift. Someone asks him how he's feeling. It's lunchtime, so she buys hot chocolate. He waits for a number to be called. Paramedics are taking a coffee break. Brown, the colour of Jersey cows, the earth after winter frost, dried blood from a wound. So, although the cancer is cured, her life is very, very difficult, very socially isolated because of all the reasons that Vikky said. I sent that poem to the International Journal of Narrative Medicine, which is an American journal online. I'm telling you this because those of you that write do send your work there because they want work from Britain, and they accepted it. You can Google it. So I have two jobs to do. One is to engage people with their feelings, with writing words in a social context, so that they are seen as people and not as the woman with cancer. And that's what this group does, and now Raoul is also helping with it, which is fantastic. And the other job I have to do is to write my own poems about the centre. And as I said earlier, the way in for me has been through objects like wheelchairs and lifts, the paramedics, the ambulances, and the street. We held a summer school last summer, and for 5 mornings we went out into London. We went to St Pancras, we went to the National Gallery, we went to St James's Park, the British Museum. We sat in cafes, we talked, we went back to the centre, we wrote. And on St Pancras station, I worked with Susie, another of the artists. We gave everybody a postcard, and they drew a clock, and they put on the clock a time that was important to them, or has been important to them in their life, and then they wrote about that time in haiku. And this is the way we're trying to capture for them moments of their life when they are seen as people and not as people suffering with cancer. I've had one staff group exploring the feelings of the staff, how they feel when they come to work each morning, and how they shake off their feelings when they go home to lead another life at home. We hope to have another group. Last year, Michael Hulse gave a very engaging talk on the 3 aspects of medical poetry. He said primary medical poetry is written by the patient from the point of view of the existential self, the individual suffering, the human being suffering an illness, enduring a condition, undergoing treatment, or in some other way confronting life potentially life-changing conditions. Workers on Your Bike, Nigel, is one of those primary poems written by Annie. The second category is poems written by a carer or a loved one or someone intimately close to the person who is ill. And this writing is very often the observer's own suffering or trauma or grief, often not the patient's, but what the observer, the closely loved one, is going through. And we have carers in the group as well. And the third category that Michael Hulse described was tertiary medical poetry, which is often more dispassionate in tone, and it's written because the person writing it is standing at a greater distance from the existential experience of the patient. It may recall the experience of the medical profession or any other aspect of life within a hospital or illness. And that's really where my poem Cured comes from. I'm standing back, I'm wondering what it must be like never to be able to eat again, and to be able to talk to the patient about what he or she is going through. Against this background of my poems writing about the centre, I've also been following a woman who wanted to be followed from her illness. She's very, very ill, and I'm accompanying her in a way for her through her dying to her death by writing about her life as she's telling me, and she wants it written for her family, but she can't do it herself. That in many ways is the hardest part of the work, but with the emotional support from people like Vikky and other people in the centre, it has to be done. And keeping your professional boundary is also very difficult. It's a very difficult residency, but it's a hugely privileging one to be there. Thank you.
The Hippocrates Prize is an annual award for a poem on a medical theme, unpublished, in English, and up to 50 lines of text. There are 3 categories: an Open International Award with a first prize of £5,000, an UK NHS category with a first prize of £5,000, and a Young Poets category for which the award is £500. The deadline for the awards is the 31st of January. To find out more about the awards and how to enter, as well as to order an anthology of previous winning and commended poems, go to our website hippocrates-poetry.org.